Hello and welcome to the Coaches Show on 90.1 KBPK. I am Ryan Osborne, joined by a panel here for the Coaches Show of Javier Giron, Danny Tinoco, and Mark Pavlovich, the voice of the Fullerton College Hornets for over 20 years now. We're here to talk about the Fullerton College Softball season that was in 2022. So when I take a look at Javier, Danny, and Mark as well, Mark, I'll start it off with you. We watched this Fullerton College team last year. 2021 finishes up with a regular season championship for the Fullerton College Hornets, the first in quite some time. But then you take a look at this season, and it doesn't start out the way that they wanted.
Well, no, you don't have the pitching you thought you might have this season in the circle. I mean, last year they were dynamic in the circle. They could win when they wanted to. This is a team that Marion and Crystal thought would have the cohesiveness that they had last year. That didn't work out for them. So the cohesiveness sort of drifted down into the lineup, and when it drifts down in the lineup, what you don't get is timely hitting or solid defense. And if you look at the defensive side of it, all the numbers dropped this year. Yeah, you have freshmen that came out, but freshmen are no excuse in softball. And there's certain teams that Fullerton College just can't beat. Brad Pickler owns Fullerton College, and Brad Pickler's team unfortunately ends up second in the OEC this year. We've got to give a lot of congratulations to Santa Ana College. You know, when you talk about teams that are on the uprise, 85, 86, last time they won state championships, but they're on the upward bound. And that's the thing with growing a program. I really did expect this team to come out hungry, wanting to win the OEC championship again, and then roll that over into the regionals and the super regionals. You look at them right now, 20 and 21 and 1 overall, 13 and 10 or 13 11 respectively if you look at the OEC standings, or you go to the CCCAA standings, you'll get a little difference right there. And Danny was telling me that on the RPI they're ranked 13th.
Yeah.
So they should make the regionals. To get to the super regionals, I don't know, Ryan, because they're going to play against some really tough competition. If they happen to pull a team like Santiago Canyon, if they end up playing Cypress, if something happens where they play Palomar, Mount Sac, you name it, they should be playing around this area, but who knows? I mean, those are the gunners right now at the top of the list. You take Cerritos, right now it's Mount Sac number 1, Cerritos number 2, Cypress number 3 in RPI. Even though they lost to Santa Ana yesterday, we'll see if they stay there or not. Long Beach City College sitting at number 4, which is sort of amazing. And then you go down to, I think Palomar's at 5 or 6. So when you look at it, so those are the top dogs they're going to play against. You're going to have a dark horse team that may get into the playoffs. That's Imperial Valley. You know a lot about the pitcher over there, averaging 18 strikeouts a game. That'll be wild if they get into it. So it all depends who Fullerton matches up in the regionals and super regionals to see what happens to them. If they don't go far, it's a big step back for the program this year.
And Mark, when you talk about that 2021 team and that hunger switching over to 2022, you and I, and also Joe Pavlenko, who is part of KBPK, we did broadcast for Fullerton College Softball last year, and we looked at the lineup, and it just seemed like every single time they had the opportunity to come up to the plate, it was just this sense of, okay, so they're knocking in runs here.
Yeah, well,
there was no, oh, okay, if they could get something in the gap, you know, they could work something around the bases. It was, they're going to score here.
Yeah, and Ryan, the other thing is, realize last year all 3 of us were impressed with their outfield.
Mm-hmm.
Dee Ramirez, I'm going to throw this back at you. Before anybody else said she should be OEC Player of the Year, you touted her as the OEC Player of the Year. This year, I might, looking at some of the players I've got to see, I might look at the center fielder for Brad Pickler's team. Defensively is just an outrageous center field. Cameron Curiel is just outrageous out there in center field. All 5'2" of her, she can go get the ball, slap hitter. She had an inside the park home run yesterday against Santa Ana that just showed her dynamic aspect. But you look at Dee Ramirez this year. Dee Ramirez this year is not Dee Ramirez from last year and that has a lot to do with them not doing as well this season.
Well, I'm going to play ping pong here for a second. You bring it over to me for D. I'll actually send it over to Danny for D. Ramirez. When you take a look at how she started this year versus the last time that you two guys got to see her, what was something you observed from D. Ramirez?
Well, just based off statistically, when I first saw her playing for the first time and I was looking at her stats, she had a very high average. It was up around 500. She was consistently just hitting the ball wherever she pleased. She was putting the ball in play. But after that, when I come back looking at the stats now, she's hitting 353, which it's not terrible, but it's not up to D. Ramirez standards. And even though she did lead the Hornets in the majority of categories, like for triples and home runs, she had 3 and 4 respectively, I just didn't see that same tenacity as I did see early on in the season, kind of like a sense of droning. And you can kind of see it also in the lineup as well. After, I believe it was Madison Peavy-House, the average just dropped. It went from I believe it was 333 down to like 274 and just kept dropping after that.
And that's where it goes back to the cohesiveness that Mark was talking about. When you are in a batting order, a lot of people just think, oh, okay, well, I mean, chemistry doesn't matter, especially when you're coming up to the plate, because plain and simple, it's just one-on-one, you versus the pitcher. Sure, there's that sense of that, but the chemistry matters in the fact of who you have in front of you versus who you have hitting behind you. If you have someone like a Sky Samano hitting in front of you, she gets on base, it changes the way that your at-bat is going to go, because you know Sky Samano, one of the fastest players in the Orange Empire Conference, she's going to be moving around. And you think to yourself, well, I don't have to really exert myself to force a home run, to force an extra base hit here, because if I get on base, well, I've got Peavy-House directly behind me, or I've got D. Ramirez directly behind me who's going to drive me in or move people around the bases. So there's not as much pressure on you when you're up at the plate. It changes the way that you go up and handle in at bat. So when you look at the cohesiveness and the 1 through 9 in terms of the batting order, that's where that comes into play. Now, Javier, I'll switch it over to you. The first time that we came out to Fullerton College Softball, that first couple of weeks of the coaches show for this semester, how do you see this team progressing going from that first time we were out here towards now?
So actually looking at the stats of how they were going throughout the first beginning of the years of the coaches show, I saw the game intense. It was very fun when you guys said, oh, we're doing softball. I was out there because those games were fun. And now looking into the schedule, I've just seen loss, loss, loss. Their batting percentage have dropped consistently. But now with playoffs inbound, I think they really have to step up their game if they're going to have a shot at the title.
I mean, when you mention that, you look at the playoffs and something that we know Mark Pavlovich absolutely loves, RPI. That's where it comes into play, as he's going to give me a death stare later on. But that RPI is always going to be important, at least for the time being, as the way that the rules are written in not only the Orange Empire Conference, but the state of California as well. Mark, when you take a look at the RPI for Fullerton, RPI-wise, they look solid in terms of getting into the postseason and continuing on in the playoffs.
Well, yeah, but realize RPI rewards you for who you play, not what you do. So it's 25% on known teams that you actually beat, teams with better records. You get 25% for just playing those teams. That 25% add-on to that is how those teams played against other better teams, and then you take the last percentage of that and you look how everybody plays. So if you play a tough schedule, and even though you're not a winning program, RPI bumps you up the food chain. If you play a weaker schedule, but you're a dynamic softball team, your RPI is very low. So that's why when you look, Mount Sac's RPI is where it is. That's why Cerritos, who took on everybody this year and won, RPI is there. Long Beach City College plays in a difficult conference for them. So they play Mount Sac, they play Cerritos. So that's why their RPI is up. When you look at the OEC, let's be very realistic. You got Cypress, they raise your RPI. You got Santiago Canyon, they raise your RPI. Santa Ana last year, even though they couldn't finish, and you throw in this year, they raise your RPI. So even if you can't beat those teams, your RPI is high for a non-successful season. And that allows you to get, at the end of the day, into the regionals and or super regionals, which you have to beat people to get onto the next level. I think the most disappointing part for me, though, when I look at this Hornet team, last year Ryan Osborne, they had defensive players that would go out and get the ball. If you go back and go through all the box scores, guys, you're going to go 3 errors, 5 errors, 2 errors. They gave up more unearned runs than we have seen in a long time. And I know Crystal and Speedy weren't happy with that at all.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and also bouncing off what Javier said, you take a look at the back half of the schedule in terms of losses. Well, you can also take a look at the error score for Fullerton College in those losses. I mean, Danny, Javier, you take a look at the schedule, and it just seems like almost every time, at least 85 to 90% of the time that Fullerton College ended up dropping a game, they had 2 to 3 errors. When they had a clean sheet or just 1 error, they had a really, really good win percentage. If I remember right, I think it was over 65% of all their games with no or 1 errors, they were able to win. 65% win rate in any conference in Southern California and the rest of the state of California is going to put you in the playoffs and probably in the top 10 as well. So when it comes to those errors, they're a huge component of the game of softball. Not enough people realize it. Not enough people realize just how much of an effect it has on your season. I mean, just think about it. Fullerton College plays, let's say, a Cypress or a Santa Ana. They have a 3 to 4 error game. They drop that game. Okay. Now, in the grand scheme of things, you think to yourself, oh, well, you know, Fullerton is still going to finish in the top 3 in their conference, and they'll be fine. They'll be in the postseason. Well, those 2, 3, 4 errors cost them, not because of just who they lost to, but because that singular loss might drop them a couple percentage points behind someone else in the RPI. If they had a clean game, well, all of a sudden you're looking at having that 65% chance of winning rather than a 35% chance of losing in that ball game, and it gives you an opportunity to bump up yourself 1 or 2 spots in the RPI. Doesn't seem like much, but it prevents you from going immediately from a Palomar type of team that you have to face in the playoffs to facing someone more like an Imperial Valley, who does have that very dominant one pitcher, but after her, well, they're still looking for that consistent pitching staff. So those 1, 2, 3, 4 errors in a game, they don't look costly at the time, but it really does prove its point at the end of the season when you have to face one of the best teams in the state of California rather than facing a middling team.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's like that old saying goes, defense wins championships. Defense is one of the most important things on any sport, especially when it comes to softball. Like you mentioned before, those singular errors, whether it's multiple or maybe just 1, it can really dictate how your season goes. It kind of brings in that question, the what if question, like what if we didn't commit these errors? That means we could have won, and we could have been in a higher position in the standings. So I do, and if you look at the fielding percentages too, the highest one, I believe, was 970 belonging to Madison Peavy House, but that was because she had a decent amount of putouts and assists. After that, anything that was higher than that was just because of lack of performance when it comes to like actually fielding the ball, like lack of attempts. And then everything else was below 950. There's a couple in the 870s, and if you really think about it, anything below 950 or even 960, it's gonna cost you regardless of how good that player is on offense.
I agree. Stuff can come back and bite you. I know this might be off topic, but football. When I was playing football on my team, if we missed a field goal, that came back and bit us at the end because we lost that game, and overall our record was going to fall. But if Fullerton corrects those errors and stays strong as a team, I don't see a doubt that they'll be going far in this playoff.
Well, I mean, it's like you're talking about. You're from a football background. Mark, you and I have seen a lot of Fullerton College football where we look at them and we go, okay, at the end of this game, Fullerton College drops this game because they had 4 different drop passes in the first quarter. Now, most people would look and say, but the fourth quarter is where the game happens. No, it's the first quarter, the first couple of innings, those first few games where you have an error. That's what costs you at the end of the season, not because of how you play towards the back half. The back half is always going to be competitive. It's always going to be either you're really hot or you're cold going in towards the playoffs. It's how you perform from game 1 to game 20 that really decides where your season is going to go. And those errors, as they continue to stack up, really force you into a tougher position towards the playoffs. And one of the other components of this game that we haven't talked about yet, when you want to talk about errors and giving extra chances, is the circle. Because you take a look at Santa Ana, you take a look at Cypress as well, and we were talking about Imperial Valley just a few moments ago. If you're a pitcher for this Fullerton College staff, which has an ERA of north of 3.5, you're looking at your defense and you're going, okay, I want to get out of this inning. I need to get out of this inning. But all of a sudden you have a fielding error and it costs them big innings. We saw it yesterday for Fullerton College where they had the lead 4-3 over top of Santiago Canyon. They give up 7 straight and they end up dropping that one in the 6th inning. A late game opportunity for Fullerton that they just couldn't finish off. So Mark, when you take a look at the circle, one of the biggest things in the Orange Empire Conference is always going to be pitching. But for Fullerton College, you take a look at the ERAs overall mixed with the errors, and it just feels like Fullerton was lacking that extra piece to get themselves out of things.
Well, when we go back to last year, we had better numbers in the circle, and we look at this year, their numbers have risen. Realize the pressure that it gets on. I mean, 3 basic rules for softball. Good pitching from the circle, timely hitting, and excellent defense out there. And realize if you're in the circle, we saw it yesterday in the Santa Ana Cypress game, that Emily Rush gave up 5 consecutive hits with 2 outs in the 1st inning. Santa Ana scores 3 runs and holds on to 3-2. No errors in the game. I mean, there was some outrageous defense played in that game yesterday. But what does that do? That puts pressure on people. That means I can't boot it. And that's the other thing when we look at the errors on the infield, Ryan, you play games now. You're out there playing hockey. If you're not certain of your left winger and you're bringing the puck up, do I pass it to him or not? I don't think I should because he's not going to have his stick in the right position. It's going to go to the board and it's a turnover. I guess I'll take it myself. So usually teams are strong up the middle. Maybe a really good third base person. If I'm at shortstop and I don't trust my third baseman, I'm going to open up my range as a shortstop. Same thing over at second. And that creates more errors too. And if you're a pitcher, you start to think, I've got to work the outside corner. I've got to work the outside corner. I can't let him hit shots at my people. And that's where it hurts. You look at yesterday, you had an ERA under 1 for Santa Ana, 0.95 going into the game. And you look at Cypress with Emily Rush and said, wow, they're in trouble. Yet Emily Rush's ERA was 1.96. I'll take that. You know where I'm at on ERAs in softball. If you're in the 3s, boy, you better have some really good hitters, like at Santiago Canyon, and play the best defense so they are at the top, average-wise and defensively-wise, and that's how they win their games. If they get good pitching from the circle, they're going to beat the pants off you. If they don't, they're still got a chance because they're going to play better defense than you, and they're going to out-hit you. None of those 3 categories worked for Fullerton this year.
Now I'm going to change the theme here. We've talked a lot about what Fullerton College should have done better, where they could have capitalized. Now we're going to switch things over. Because of their RPI, we're looking at things and going, they should be in the CCCAA postseason. So let's take a look at who's done pretty well and who can be a key factor going into the postseason. Personally for me, Nahara has been one of the best pitchers on this staff, 2.77 ERA. Now, I know what your stance is on ERA, Mark, but considering when she's brought into the game, each and every time she's brought in for Fullerton, she comes in with a big at-bat, or facing a big at-bat, I should say, facing the cleanup hitter with less than an out and the bases are loaded. I've seen 2nd and 3rd, no outs, and she's tossed in there to get them out of an inning, and she does it consistently. Nahara is going to be one of the biggest players for Fullerton going forward, especially in the circle, and someone that Fullerton can rely on to get themselves an opportunity to continue to move on in the postseason.
I'm going to go with Dee Ramirez. Dee was there last year. Dee is the leader on this team. Yeah, whatever you want to say about the non-cohesiveness that I talked about if the rest of the team sort of steps up behind D, because you can watch D get frustrated out there. You can watch D get tweaked because the team doesn't play well. If they step up behind D. Ramirez, because I think D is still one of the better softball players in the OEC, I think she can be the leader of that team, and being the leader of that team, they will have some games that will be willed into a victory because of D. Ramirez.
For me personally, I have to go with the backstop, Casey Dufresne. Like I mentioned before, in offense, it was her and D. Ramirez constantly switching in between the first and second position in terms of hitting. Casey Dufresne had more doubles, which I feel like, even though home runs, they do drive in runs, I feel like doubles are one of the more important hitting things when it comes to hitting overall. And also just taking away from the offensive standpoint, for pitching and defense. She is basically the captain of the defense. She dictates where she wants to pitch, how she wants to pitch, how to approach the hitter. So I do feel like if she can command her pitching staff the way that she feels like she needs to, I feel like that can become very key when it comes to winning games.
And I'm going to have to go with Mark on this one. D. Ramirez, honestly, she's had a bit of a decline in her stats, but going into this, since I did an interview with her, she was built as a leader. She is motivational. She brings something else to this team, and I believe that if she can get that back on track, this Fullerton College team will advance no problem.
So, we have our 4 players who are key for Fullerton College. Very quickly, I want to thank the coaching staff for Fullerton College Softball. Coach Crystal, Coach Speedy, thank you very much for allowing us to be out there throughout the entirety of this season. We're going to hear a little bit more from them next week here on the Coaches Show. But again, a big thank you for allowing myself, Javier, Danny, Mark, and also Holden Remy to go out there, talk to the players, get in a different perspective from this team, whether it be about the educational aspect of coaching, whether it be about the studies that they have to go through, the workload that each of these different athletes has to take on to be a student athlete at Fullerton College and make sure that they not only stay eligible on the athletic side, but also hitting the books as well. So we want to thank Coach Speedy, Coach Crystal, the entirety of the staff for the Fullerton College softball team. So that's going to wrap up our softball portion of this Coaches Show. Again, big thank you to Coach Crystal and Coach Speedy. We will hear more from them coming up next week. Now, one of the reasons for the placement that we have here on the Coaches Show for this week is having Hal Scherbeck directly behind us. Everyone knows Hal Scherbeck is one of the founders of this Fullerton College legacy in terms of football. Mark Pavlovich, who at the end there is the voice of the Hornets for over 20 years. I myself have been with this program for just about 9 seasons as well. When you take a look at Fullerton College, unfortunately, Mark, we had the news this week that a Fullerton College legend ended up passing on. Jeff Jesperson, who was the defensive coordinator and also a defensive assistant coach for a long time for Fullerton College, ended up passing on, and he was a legend in his own right here at Fullerton. Coached a national championship team, coached many All-Americans, coached many guys who moved on into the pro level, went on to play in the CFL, went on to play in the NFL, and Mark, when I got to speak to him, he was one of the nicest men I have ever encountered when it comes to talking to this Fullerton College football team.
Well, he was a Hornet through and through. Once a Hornet, always a Hornet with him. And if you look at the young men that he did coach, and I always bring up the phrase, thank you, Ryan, because you brought it up, student athlete. If you talk to them about their careers, they will look at people like him and Hal and say, hey, I am where I am today because of them. I tell you the thing, though, guys, which really, when you had to look at Coach Jesperson, we all sort of sit here and think we're in shape. Ryan Osborne can tell you, this man would walk out in his later years. I mean, we're talking my age, baby. And he would wear the skin-tight shorts, a shirt that was tied around him, and he had the body of a 35-year-old every time we saw him. And you just sort of looked at him and went, that's what a football coach is supposed to look like they're in shape and they care about the game. We have some other coaches that used to be out here that, well, you know, they probably went out to lunch with Joseph, I am the big sandwich, Pavlenko, because, yeah, they had a shape, but I won't describe it. And that's the thing too, like Ryan brought up, you could ask Coach Jesperson anything and he would take time out to talk to you, and he would give you the aspects of true coach speak when you talked about how to play defense.
One of the best stories that I have of Coach Jesperson, when I first started moving on to the Coaches Show. Second season on the Coaches Show, and starting to get my bearings, kind of figuring things out, approaching more people around the program, and we had the honorees for the 1955 National Championship team come out to the 2015 Key to the County game. Coach Jesperson was there. He's walking around. I walk up to him and I say, "Hey, Coach Jesperson, how are you doing? You mind if I get an interview with you? Because I'm trying to talk to, everyone just associated with the program and prior teams as well." And he looked at me and he goes, "Okay, I'll do an interview." Does the interview with me, finishes off the interview, and he looks at me and he goes, "I have an idea, kid. Here, I remember one of my players who hated talking to the media or hated doing interviews. I'm going to put him on the spot right now." So he walked over, grabbed another guy and said, "Ooh, I have an idea for you. Here, just stand here. All right, turn on the camera and go." And he walked away. That was one of the best times I've ever had as a host of the Coaches Show, being around this program. And he was just, like Mark mentioned, I could go up to him and ask him anything, coach speak wise. Hey, I was new to football at the time. What even is a run pass option? Well, you see, this is what it is, and this is how you defend against it. What is a nickel package? This is what it is, and this is how you put it in, how you implement it into your defense. He was the type of person who would take the time out, explain what's going on, and then allow you to observe as well. So when it comes to Coach Jesperson, it's not just the impact that he had on the field in terms of results, championships, conference championships, but it's also the men he molded around this program and also the people that he talked to around the program, not just in it.
Yeah, exactly. Ryan, I think you wrapped it up. I mean, a man that we respected, that we liked, and a man who was once a Hornet, always a Hornet. It was a pleasure meeting him, knowing him, and feeling like we were family with him. Every time he saw you, he always said hi to you. It wasn't like, "Hey, guess who I am?" And I think that's the biggest thing I have to say, a man that you really respected and admired what he did, why he was here at Fullerton College and beyond.
So for Coach Jesperson, big thank you to him and everything that he did for this program. Talking to me as well, just from a personal level, on the Coaches Show and off the Coaches Show as well. As Mark said, once a Hornet, always a Hornet. That was always the case with Coach Jesperson. I'm Ryan Osborne. For Mark Pavlovich, Danny Tinoco, and Javier Hiron, you've been watching the Coaches Show on 90.1 KBPK.